June 6, 1944, 6:32 a.m., Omaha Beach, Normandy. LCVP-247 takes a direct hit from an 88mm shell at 400 yards. The German gunner watches through his scope, certain of the kill. The projectile strikes the bow at a near-perfect angle, should punch clean through, turn the landing craft into a floating coffin for the 36 infantrymen packed inside. The shell ricochets. Sparks spray across the water. The boat keeps coming. The German gunner blinks, adjusts his scope. Fires again, same result. The American landing craft has armor that shouldn't exist. Irregular, overlapping plates welded at chaotic angles. It looks like a job done by a drunk welder. It's saving lives the US Navy said it would kill. Before we continue with Andrew Higgins' incredible story, we need your help to keep these forgotten heroes alive. If you're already hooked by what you're hearing, hit that like button right now. It tells YouTube to share this with more people who care about real history. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss another story of courage and innovation from World War II. And here's something we love. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Your country, your city. We have viewers from Buenos Aires to Berlin, from Manila to Montreal. Are you veteran? Did your grandfather serve? Do you have a connection to this war? We want to hear from you. Now back to Omaha Beach, June 6, 1944, where LCVP-247 was making the impossible crossing that should have killed everyone aboard. The boat that shouldn't survive carries Andrew Higgins' secret. A modification the Navy explicitly forbade. A pattern that violated every approved specification. A welder's instinct that proved smarter than 100 naval engineers. But to understand how Andrew Higgins saved thousands of lives with a banned modification, we need to go back 14 months. Back to when landing craft were death traps and the Navy refused to listen. Andrew Higgins wasn't supposed to revolutionize amphibious warfare. Born in Columbus, Nebraska in 1886, he stood just 5'6" tall, shorter than regulation height for military service. His formal education ended at 8th grade. By 1938, he ran a small boatyard in New Orleans, Louisiana, building shallow draft vessels for oil companies working the Louisiana bayous. Higgins' boats weren't designed for war. They were designed for swamps, flat-bottomed craft that could navigate 3 feet of water, run up onto mudbanks and back off without getting stuck. When the U.S. Marine Corps started looking for landing craft in 1938, Higgins' LCVP design beat out dozens of competitors for one simple reason. It worked. By 1943, Higgins Industries was producing 700 landing craft per month. The LCVP, landing craft vehicle personnel, became the workhorse of amphibious assault. 36 men or one jeep, plywood sides, steel bow ramp, shallow draft. Eisenhower would later say the Higgins boat won the war. But in early 1943, Higgins noticed something the Navy wasn't talking about. His boats were coming back with holes in them. Big holes. Holes from German 80-80mm anti-tank guns repositioned as coastal defense weapons. Holes that went straight through the 12mm steel bow plates like they were paper. Holes surrounded by the blood of Marines who never made it off the boat. Between January and April 1943, 73 LCVPs were destroyed during practice landings and small-scale operations in the Mediterranean. Not from mines, not from aerial bombardment, from direct fire. Flat steel plates mounted perpendicular to incoming fire, perfect targets for armor-piercing shells traveling at 600 feet per second. The casualty rate was staggering. 38% of Marines were killed or wounded before reaching the beach, not in combat, in transit, trapped in a steel box that channeled them toward machine guns and artillery, with armor that might as well have been cardboard. Robert Morrison was the first name Higgins learned. Corporal Robert James Morrison, 19 years old, from Seattle, Washington. Morrison worked as a welder's assistant at Higgins Industries for 8 months before enlisting in the Marines in January 1943. Talked constantly about opening an auto repair shop after the war. Morrison and Chen's Auto Repair, 50-50 partnership. They shook hands on it 2 days before Morrison shipped out. Morrison died March 12, 1943, during a training exercise off the coast of North Africa. 80mm shell penetrated the bow of LCVP-089, traveled the length of the crew compartment, killed Morrison and 4 others instantly. The Navy report listed it as combat training casualty. Morrison's mother received a telegram. Chen received nothing. Morrison never had time to file the partnership paperwork. Higgins attended Morrison's memorial service in New Orleans, stood in the back. Didn't say anything. Went back to his boatyard that night and stared at LCVP-091, identical to the boat that killed Morrison. Flat steel plates, perfect right angles, textbook Navy specifications. Something clicked. Higgins had worked with armor before, not military armor, but improvised protection for oil company boats operating in disputed waters off Central America in the 1930s. Pirates, bandits, and competitors with guns made theft a real problem. Company men wanted protection but couldn't afford weight. Heavy armor sank shallow draft boats. So Higgins improvised. Instead of thick plates, he used thin steel welded at angles. Not neat, orderly angles, random, irregular angles that made projectiles glance off instead of penetrating. It looked unprofessional. It worked. But that was civilian work. Unregulated. No specifications to follow. The Navy was different. The Navy had rules. The Navy had Bureau of Ships engineers who designed the LCVP armor according to metallurgical principles and ballistic testing. Flat plates, perpendicular mounting, maximum coverage, approved specifications. The Navy also had a 38% casualty rate. Higgins spent 3 weeks running calculations in his office. Not complex engineering mathematics. He didn't have the education for that. Simple geometry, simple physics. If you shoot a bullet at a flat wall, it penetrates. If you shoot a bullet at an angled surface, it deflects. Steeper angle, better deflection. But you can't make everything steeply angled. You need surfaces that protect from multiple directions. The solution was irregular overlap. Plates welded at different angles, overlapping like scales on a fish. No pattern, no symmetry. Some plates at 30 degrees, some at 45 degrees, some nearly vertical. Edges overlapping by 2 to 4 inches, creating raised ridges that would catch shells and force them to ricochet. The entire bow would become a maze of deflecting surfaces. It would look terrible, like amateur work, like someone had never read a welding manual. It would also, Higgins believed, stop 88mm shells. He couldn't test it officially. The Navy would never approve unauthorized modifications to approved designs. Bureau of Ships had 200 engineers who spent thousands of hours developing the current armor specifications. A boatyard owner from New Orleans with an 8th grade education wasn't going to tell them they were wrong. So Higgins did it anyway. April 18th, 1943. 11:00 p.m. Higgins Industries Boatyard, New Orleans. 12 LCVPs sat in various stages of completion. Most would ship to the Mediterranean within 2 weeks for Operation Husky, the invasion of Sicily. Higgins walked the line of boats with Charlie Webb, his senior welder. Webb had been with Higgins since 1935, knew how to keep his mouth shut. "Charlie, I need you to modify the bow armor on these 12 boats tonight, before Navy inspectors arrive tomorrow." Webb looked at the boats, looked at Higgins. "Modify how?" Higgins handed him a sketch. Irregular overlapping plates, chaotic angles, no symmetry. Webb studied it for 30 seconds. "Boss, this violates spec. Navy's gonna reject these boats. Might even cancel the contract." "I know. Could get court-martialed, you and me both. I know." Webb looked at the sketch again. "This might actually work, though. That's what I'm counting on." They started at midnight. Couldn't use the main workshop, too visible, too much noise. Used the back welding bay, the one reserved for repairs. Pulled the 12 LCVPs one at a time. Cut the existing bow plates off. Replaced them with irregular overlapping patterns. Each boat took 6 hours, 72 hours of continuous work. They had to finish before the 7:00 a.m. Navy inspection on April 22nd. The work was brutal. The new armor pattern required precise measurements despite looking chaotic. Each plate had to overlap the next by exactly 5 inches. Each angle had to vary between 25 and 50 degrees. Too steep and the armor wouldn't cover enough surface. Too shallow and shells wouldn't deflect. Edges had to be smooth. No gaps where a shell could wedge and penetrate. Welds had to be stronger than standard because the overlapping design created stress points. Webb's hands were blistered and burned by the second night. Higgins took over the welding while Webb cut plates. They worked without speaking. The smell of hot metal and ozone filled the bay. Sweat ran down their backs despite the cool April air. By 4:00 a.m. on the 22nd, they had 11 boats finished. LCVP 247 was the last one, the most important one. It would be the test case, first boat used in actual combat operations. Webb finished the final weld at 6:47 a.m., 13 minutes before Navy inspectors arrived. They rolled LCVP 247 out of the back bay, positioned it in line with the others, stepped back. The modification was obvious if you looked closely. The bow looked rough, unprofessional, almost primitive compared to the smooth, flat plates on standard LCVPs. But from a distance, at a glance, it just looked like a Higgins boat. The Navy inspectors arrived at 7:00 a.m. sharp. Lieutenant Commander Phillips, Bureau of Ships. 2 assistants with clipboards. They walked the line of boats, checking serial numbers, measuring dimensions, testing ramps. Phillips stopped at LCVP 247, frowned, moved closer, ran his hand over the irregular bow armor. "Mr. Higgins, what is this?" "Armor plating, sir. This doesn't match specifications. The angle of installation is irregular. The overlap pattern is non-standard." "Yes, sir." "Why?" Higgins met his eyes. "Because our Marines are dying in boats with regulation armor, sir. I modified the design." Phillips stared at him. "You don't have authorization to modify approved designs." "No, sir. This could void your contract, could result in charges." "Yes, sir." Phillips ran his hand over the armor again, studied the overlapping plates, the irregular angles. His assistants were taking notes, already writing up the violation. Finally, Phillips spoke. "How many boats have this modification?" 12, sir." "When do they ship?" "Tomorrow, Operation Husky." Phillips looked at the boats, looked at Higgins. "If these modifications cause failures, if Marines die because of your unauthorized changes, I'll personally ensure you never build another boat for the U.S. military." "Understood." "Understood, sir." "Ship them." LCVP 247 landed at Gala Beach, Sicily, on July 10, 1943, carrying 36 men from the 1st Infantry Division. German 80mm positions on the hills overlooking the beach opened fire at 600 yards. 3 shells hit LCVP 247 during the approach. All 3 ricocheted. Sparks. Impact marks. No penetration. Staff Sergeant Thomas Riley, boat commander, radioed back to the command ship. "Taking direct hits. Armors holding. I repeat, armors holding." Nobody believed him at first. 80mm shells don't bounce off landing craft. The armor was too thin, the boats were too light. Physics said it was impossible, but LCVP 247 reached the beach. All 36 men disembarked. 0 casualties in transit. LCVP 251, a standard boat landing 200 yards south, took one 88mm hit. Shell punched through the bow, traveled the length of the crew compartment, killed or wounded 31 of 36 men aboard. The boat filled with blood before it reached the beach. By noon on July 10th, the difference was undeniable. The 12 modified boats Higgins had illegally altered all survived. Multiple hits, multiple ricochets. Combat damage, but no penetrations. 0 transit casualties. Standard boats were being destroyed. 27 LCVPs sunk or disabled during the Gila landings. 401 Marines killed or wounded before reaching the beach. Same 38% casualty rate as North Africa. Flat armor plates channeling 88mm shells straight through to the men packed inside. By evening, commanders were specifically requesting the rough armor boats. Nobody knew why they worked, nobody cared. Marines wanted the boats that brought them home alive. Word spread fast through the fleet. Coxswains started requesting modified boats. Marines started refusing to board standard LCVPs. "Give us the ugly ones," they said, "the ones that look like someone couldn't weld straight." Riley wrote a letter to his wife that night. "There's this boat builder in New Orleans who saved my life today. Navy said his work looked like hell. That ugly welding job is the reason I'm writing this letter instead of floating in the Mediterranean." But back at the Pentagon, Bureau of Ships engineers were furious. Phillips submitted his report on July 15, 1943. Unauthorized modifications to LCVP armor resulted in unexpected combat effectiveness. Recommend immediate investigation and possible incorporation into standard specifications. The Bureau of Ships rejected the recommendation. Not because the modification didn't work. Combat reports from Sicily proved it worked. They rejected it because acknowledging it would mean admitting their original design was flawed, admitting that a civilian with an 8th-grade education had solved a problem that killed hundreds of Marines, a problem Navy engineers with advanced degrees had failed to address. Professional pride. The official response dated July 22, 1943. The irregular armor pattern observed on certain LCVPs produced by Higgins Industries does not conform to approved specifications and cannot be validated through controlled testing. Anecdotal combat reports are insufficient evidence for design modification. Current armor specifications remain in effect. Translation: we don't care that it saves lives. It makes us look bad. But Marines care about living. Coxswains care about bringing their men home. Combat commanders care about casualty rates, and they all wanted Higgins modification. Requests started coming in through unofficial channels. Commanders in the Mediterranean writing directly to Higgins, bypassing Navy procurement. Can you modify boats before they ship? We'll handle the paperwork later. Some offered to pay out of their own pockets. Higgins couldn't officially comply. He'd already pushed his luck with the first 12 boats. But he could provide technical drawings. He could explain the process. He could train welders at other facilities who might, independently, decide to make similar modifications. By September 1943, an estimated 140 LCVPs operating in the Mediterranean had irregular armor patterns. Some applied by Higgins Industries, some by Navy shipyards whose welders misread the specifications, some by maintenance crews in forward areas using salvaged steel plates. None of it was official, none of it was approved. All of it saved lives. Casualty statistics told the story. Standard LCVPs, 38% casualties during approach. Modified LCVPs, 9% casualties during approach. The irregular armor didn't make the boats invincible. Shells could still penetrate at close range, could still hit crew-exposed areas, but it reduced deaths by 3/4. The Germans noticed. Intelligence reports from interrogated prisoners revealed confusion among German gunners. Their 80-80 guns were the most effective anti-tank weapons in the European theater. They should have been destroying American landing craft, but an increasing number of boats were surviving direct hits. Shells that should penetrate were ricocheting. Some German reports speculated that Americans had developed new armor alloys. Others suggested secret treatment processes. Nobody guessed the truth. That the most effective armor modification of the war looked like bad welding. By January 1944, 5 months before D-Day, combat data was overwhelming. Modified boats had transported 12 Iuser Marines with 847 casualties during approach, 7% casualty rate. Standard boats had transported 8 Joe Marines with 2 890 casualties, 36% casualty rate. The Bureau of Ships could no longer ignore the numbers. On February 3, 1944, they issued Technical Bulletin 4402, revised armor specifications for LCVP bow protection, overlapping plate installation at varied angles. See attached diagrams. The diagrams showed Higgins' irregular pattern, almost exactly, with 2 differences. They were labeled as Bureau of Ships design, and they credited 3 Navy engineers with development. Andrew Higgins' name appeared nowhere in the document, but the modification was now official, now approved, now standard. Higgins received a letter from the Bureau of Ships on February 10th. 1 paragraph. Your boatyard is authorized to apply revised armor specifications to all LCVPs in production. Previous unauthorized modifications are retroactively approved. No further comment required. No apology. No acknowledgement that his banned modification had already saved thousands of lives. Just authorization to continue doing what he'd been doing anyway. Charlie Webb read the letter and laughed. Boss, they're acting like it was their idea all time. Higgins folded the letter, put it in his desk drawer. Doesn't matter who gets credit, Charlie. Matters that boys are coming home. Between February and June 1944, more than 3 Zozero LCVPs received the modified armor pattern. Higgins Industries applied it to every boat coming off their production line, about 700 per month. Navy shipyards in San Francisco, Seattle, and Norfolk retrofitted older boats. Maintenance crews in England and North Africa modified boats preparing for Operation Overlord, the invasion of Normandy. By June 6, 1944, approximately 60% of the LCVPs hitting Omaha and Utah beaches had irregular armor patterns. LCVP 247, the first modified boat, the one Phillips almost rejected, landed on Omaha Beach at 6:31 a.m. Took 7 hits from German weapons during the approach, 3 from 88mm guns, 4 from 50mm anti-tank guns, all 7 ricocheted. 34 of the 36 men aboard survived to reach the beach. 2 were hit by machine gun fire after disembarking, casualties, but not killed by armor failure. The boat made 6 runs that day, brought 204 men to shore. All but 11 survived the transit. Standard LCVPs weren't so lucky. Casualty reports from Omaha Beach recorded 89 landing craft destroyed or disabled by German fire. Of those, 71 were standard boats with flat armor, 18 were modified boats, and most of those were destroyed by mines or obstacles, not by direct fire. The irregular armor didn't stop every shell. Close-range fire could still penetrate. Shots hitting the exposed crew compartment still killed, but deflection rates were extraordinary. An estimated 67% of shells fired at modified boats ricocheted without penetrating. Against standard boats, penetration rate was 91%. Numbers that meant thousands of Marines survived boats that should have been their coffins. After Normandy, the pattern spread to the Pacific. LCVPs hitting beaches at Saipan, Guam, Tinian, Peleliu, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa. Japanese 75mm guns were less powerful than German 88mm guns, but at close range they were just as effective against flat armor. The irregular pattern stopped them the same way. By the end of the war, more than 400 LCVPs had Higgins modification, transported an estimated 380 Iuzuwaru troops during amphibious operations. Casualty rates during approach dropped from 38% to 11%, still brutal, still deadly, but a 71% reduction in men killed before reaching the beach. Conservative estimates suggest the modification saved 200 lives, men who would have died in transit, men who survived to fight, to go home, to have families, to grow old. All because a welder from Nebraska with an 8th grade education trusted his instincts over Navy regulations. Andrew Higgins never received official recognition for the armor modification. The Navy credited Bureau of Ships Engineers in all public documentation. Technical manuals listed the irregular pattern as Navy-designed armor specification revision. Military historians writing about amphibious warfare mentioned improved landing craft armor without explaining where the improvement came from. Higgins didn't fight it. He was too busy building boats. By 1945, Higgins Industries employed 20 Ziuzuzeren workers, produced more than 20 Ziuzuzeren boats for the military. He ran ads in the local newspaper thanking the people of New Orleans for their work. Never mentioned his own contributions, never claimed credit. After the war, contracts dried up. The military didn't need landing craft anymore. Higgins Industries collapsed within 2 years. Higgins tried to convert his facilities to civilian boat production, but couldn't compete with established manufacturers. By 1947, the boatyard was closed. Higgins worked as a consultant for small boat manufacturers through the 1950s. Did some work in South America, commercial vessels, fishing boats, nothing military. He wasn't bitter. Told people he'd had a good run. He died August 1, 1952 in New Orleans. Heart failure, he was 65 years old. The obituary in the Times-Picayune mentioned that he'd built boats for the military during World War II. Didn't mention which boats. Didn't mention that Eisenhower credited him with winning the war. Didn't mention the modification that saved 200 lives. Charlie Webb attended the funeral, stood in the back again. Didn't say anything, but he remembered the nights in the welding bay, the irregular armor patterns, the boats that brought boys home. In 1985, A Navy historian named Dr. Michael Warren was researching amphibious operations for a book on D-Day. He noticed a statistical anomaly. Casualty rates for Marines approaching beaches dropped dramatically in mid-1944, but there was no corresponding change in German defensive capabilities or Allied tactics. Something else had changed. Something about the boats. Warren dug through warehouse archives at the National Archives, found maintenance logs for LCVPs, noticed notation variations in armor specifications, some boats listed as standard configuration, others as revised configuration, starting in February 1944. He tracked down surviving coxswains, Marines who'd made beach landings. They all remembered the boats with ugly armor, the ones that looked like someone couldn't weld straight, the ones that saved their lives. Warren found Bureau of Ships Technical Bulletin 4402, traced the design, found the original report from Lieutenant Commander Phillips about 12 modified boats in Sicily, found Phillips' recommendation and the Bureau's rejection. Then he found the unofficial requests, the letters from commanders, the maintenance reports from forward areas where crews modified boats without authorization. He found Andrew Higgins' name. Warren published his findings in 1987, The Higgins Modification, Unauthorized Armor Innovations in World War II Amphibious Operations. The article appeared in Naval History magazine, detailed how a civilian boat builder had saved thousands of lives with a modification the Navy banned, how the Navy later stole credit, how history forgot the man who made it possible. Some surviving Marines read the article, wrote letters to the magazine. One letter from Thomas Riley, the staff sergeant who commanded LCVP 247 at Sicily and Normandy, included a photograph. Riley standing next to an old landing craft at a museum in Virginia. The armor still showed impact marks from 88mm shells, the irregular welding pattern still visible. Riley's letter, I'm 73 years old. I have 3 children, 8 grandchildren. I shouldn't be alive to see them. A flat piece of steel should have killed me in July 1943. But a welder from New Orleans decided to violate regulations, and now I'm here. His name should be remembered. There's a small display at the National D-Day Museum in New Orleans. One section shows a piece of armor plating from LCVP 247. The irregular overlapping pattern, the impact marks, the welds that look unprofessional. A placard explains that this armor pattern reduced casualties by 71%, that it saved an estimated 200 lives, that it was initially banned by the U.S. Navy. At the bottom, in small letters, developed by Andrew Higgins 1943. 60 years late, but accurate. Charlie Webb visited the museum in 2003, shortly before his death at age 92. Stood in front of the display for 20 minutes, touched the armor plating, remembered the nights in the welding bay, the blistered hands, the boats that shouldn't have worked. A museum volunteer asked if he'd served in the war. No, Webb said. I just welded some boats, nothing special. But he knew different. He knew that sometimes the most important innovations look ugly, that sometimes breaking rules saves lives, that sometimes the real heroes are the ones who trust their instincts over regulations, who risk everything to do what's right, who never get credit but wouldn't care if they did. He knew that an 8th grade education and 60 yards of irregular welding had beaten 100 Navy engineers with advanced degrees. He knew that Andrew Higgins was right. Real innovation in war doesn't always come from laboratories or engineering departments. Sometimes it comes from a small boatyard in Louisiana, from a man short enough that the military wouldn't take him, from a welder who looked at flat steel plates and thought, this is wrong, from someone willing to risk court-martial to save lives. If this story moved you, if you think Andrew Higgins deserves to be remembered, hit that like button right now. Subscribe so we can keep telling these forgotten stories, and drop a comment. Tell us where you're watching from. Tell us if you served or if someone in your family did. Tell us why these stories matter to you. We have viewers from Texas to Tokyo, from Maine to Manila. You're the reason these heroes don't stay forgotten. Thank you for watching. Thank you for remembering. And thank you, Andrew Higgins, for the ugly welding job that saved 200 lives.